All right, we have Paul Flynn, the Chief Executive of the GPA, with us. The AGM of the Gaelic Players Association is out. The annual report has been published on their website, so there's an opportunity for everybody to kind of parse through exactly where we are at the moment and where the organisation is making progress and where they see the future going. Before I get into all of that, Paul, the circumstances for the last couple of months when you've been preparing the annual report for 2019 is actually circumstances from a different world, where there was a championship and there was vibrant sponsorship and there were bums on seats and there was broadcasting deals that were all heading one direction. So in terms of the impact that COVID has had and what it might have for the future of your organization, as well as the wider world, what's your kind of instinct about where things are going at the moment?
Thanks, Cher. It's good to be on as well. I think it was very strange to be delivering on an annual report of 2019. It feels like a very long time ago, considering what we've just gone through and what we continue to go through in relation to living with COVID-19 in our lives. Absolutely no different to any organisation, sport or otherwise. And there will be implications on the GAA, as we all know, and as well reported, but also on the GPA, as we have a partnership in relation to the commercial revenue share there. So we are keen throughout COVID and since the start of it to focus on two things: to make sure that we preserve our cash, but also ensuring that we can deliver our service provision to our players too, and arguably at a time where they need it now more than ever before, because of the implications of COVID is having no difference to the wider society, but also on players also.
Do you expect Sport Ireland to come through with the same level of grants for 2020 as they would have done in previous years? Is that even a conversation at the moment?
Well, we only have a new government, so I'm looking forward to getting in and discussing that with government and with Sport Ireland. But as I'm sure everybody is under no illusions of the implications on the economy based off COVID.
Okay, so we keep an eye out to kind of see what's happening. In terms of the annual report, there's obviously a huge interest from the wider GA community in what the direction that the GPA are trending in. And it seems, if I'm looking through the report this morning and looking back at the ESRI report, that fixtures is going to continue to be this thing which seems to be the kind of black hole that draws everybody's attention, and it might actually be the original sin of the GAA is not getting the fixture list corrected at some point. Where does that stand, and where does that fit into all of the rest of the stuff that you end up talking about when the publication happens? What level of importance did the GPA place on fixing the fixtures?
Well, ultimately, Jay, we do three things: player representation, player welfare, and player development. And under player representation, this is top of the agenda. And it has an indirect impact on the player welfare and also on player development. So it's transient across everything that we do. We invested last year heavily into the fixtures task force, which we remain committed to. Because since my first day in this role, probably not knowing a hell of a lot about the difficulties that I faced in relation to fixture reform, I did feel that the only way to find a solution was to have all the different stakeholders in the one room, and we need to find a consensus. And ultimately, that was what happened through the Fixtures Task Force. And the findings of the report have been outlined. There's 3 recommendations, but the next steps of the report were to do a roadshow across the country, outlining the findings to clubs, to counties, getting the feedback, and then outlining a way forward, let's say. Don't get me wrong, there's looking at the fixtures, the findings of the Fixtures Task Force, now through the lens of what we've just experienced, it does make changes, and I believe the next step should be getting the group together again, looking at the learnings from what we've just experienced now to a very condensed season, and then continuing with the road shows that were supposed to be face to face through digital platforms. So we could do it in a much more timely manner, and then we can find a solution that works for all. We certainly don't need there to be unrest amongst the GA community going forward because of fixtures, which we now know we can fix. We can find a solution to.
When it comes to that fixture, Sorry, Joe, just on that fixture task force, when you said there was a consensus, or at least there was a consensus as part of the ambition, was there one of the options that you had nailed down before coronavirus that was the one that you were going to be really pushing this summer?
There was one 4x8, which was groups of 4x8 and they're linked. But equally, we hadn't done our roadshow. That was my preference. To be fair, we hadn't done our own internal roadshow with the players, and it was built into our AGM. Funny enough, as a workshop in our AGM. But as you're aware, our AGM is through a Teams call, which isn't the right form for us unless we are to adapt it, like I just highlighted there. So again, I think the next steps are to get the group back together, look at it through the lens of COVID. Have we learned anything? Could we amend anything? And then go with the roadshows with the collateral prepared and the information dissected for people to understand. But there could be changes because of, as I said, the more condensed season we're going to experience.
That condensed season has given the opportunity for the club to have a period of time, and then the intercounty is going to have a period of time. Let's assume that the intercounty season goes ahead, and hopefully there'll be even more supporters allowed at those games than we have at the moment. Is that part of the model something that we should actually think about, where there's just a period of exclusivity for clubs, and then after that there's a period where training continues and then the game starts? It seems like we might have stumbled upon something perfect here.
I do believe that this is a good solution for this year. We'll have to look at whether it's the right solution going forward. We have to remember that in every week that there's football or hurling being played this year, intercounty players are asked to play. So when we talk about split seasons, or we talk about whatever model, under every one of the banners or the headings, intercounty players will be asked to play. So you need to ensure that the proper sports science is embedded within it, to ensure that there's load management, there's player welfare, understandings around injury prevention and preparation. And I think that's really, really important. I don't feel that that's fully understood and accepted by the wider GAA community. When we think about, yes, the preparation for intercounty is a greater requirement than club. It's an extra 10 minutes. The players are conditioned to a higher level. And the games of club championship first this year will to prepare them to a certain level. But under no illusions, like training at an intercounty level is like playing any championship game. And that's the level that we're at. And we need to make sure players are given the adequate time, intercounty players, to prepare for the intercounty season. So in a long-winded way, I do believe that we have stumbled along a solution for this year. It would be naive of us and silly of us not to learn from what we've just experienced, and hopefully we can then drive on and progress the fixtures reform.
So there should be some access to intercounty level sports science for intercounty players during a club season. Would that be, I'm saying that they could train with them once a week, as opposed to it being an exclusive window for, I guess, maybe a relaxation of the rules where there's no access to the intercounty management teams and their setups, the players, if this was something that might work into the future, where there was a couple of months a year where you're allowed to train with your county, you're allowed to use their sports science facilities, for want of a better word, and then you can go and continue to play with your clubs. Might that be some kind of hybrid version of what we're seeing this year that might work?
And look, Jerry, I think there's a lot of what you just said there that makes is common sense, and I think that needs to come into this. I personally, I believe that we should go with intercounty first, and if you finish your intercounty, then there won't be, you'll be completely free to play with their clubs, and there might be less of what we just experienced over the last number of weeks. But equally, if it was the other way around, or if there was some sort of hybrid, there is, by allowing intercounty players to do a strength and conditioning session in a club period, is no detriment to the club, and to the latter, actually, I'd say. And at the moment, we've no club gyms they're allowed open, but we have intercounty players that aren't allowed to train in the intercounty facility, which is a gym, and they could do it on an evening off from their club activities. They can't access a rehabilitation session with their sports physios and medical teams. So, you know, this is what the environment we're in at the moment, where it's completely split. But I do feel that if we can find a proper solution going forward, we need to ensure that common sense is built into it as well.
How do you feel that you guys have performed in terms of getting that voice out there? Because we're talking about perceptions a good bit here, and it seems as if at the moment you're constantly fighting a battle to explain exactly what your position is. How do you fix that? What's the process for you guys to be a voice that people turn to and go, okay, well, what is your perception on this, and that you get listened to, as opposed to beaten up for your press releases, which kind of seems to be the case at the moment?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's the difference between perception and reality, and unfortunately, reality is different to people's perceptions. My take on this is very clear. Like, our key stakeholder in this is the intercounty players, and because we are the representative body of the intercounty players, the 2%, as some people like to highlight it as, that's our role. We need to continue to represent them, and some of the things, Ger, that we aim to achieve may not appease everyone, but we have to just be happy in the fact that we are representing our core membership, the intercounty players. So I think that's always going to create some level of not going to use conflict a bit strong, but we're not always going to be in agreement with everybody's views of the world, because people will be strong in relation to one side or the other. I think what sometimes gets lost in it, Ger, is that all intercounty players are club players too. They're all delighted to be back with their clubs, training hard, raising the levels of of club championship, club training. It's excellent. Talking to many of them, they're enjoying the bit more space that they have at the moment. But equally, they're high performers, Ger, and they want to get back into that high performing environment and to test themselves against the best. And so, I guess, going back to your question, we're the representative body of the intercounty players. Everybody loves the intercounty players, but they hate the GPA, or misunderstand the GPA, I'd say. And so it's important that we continue just to get our message out there. And that's why, Ger, with our annual report, from my perspective, if everyone wants to go through it and read it and see all the different things that we do for the players, who they do admire, I think they get a greater appreciation for the breadth of what we do. And fixture reform certainly is one of the main items on our agenda, but it's not the only item. And there's a suite of other things that we do across player development and player welfare that maybe people just don't understand fully.
Off the back of the ESRI report last year, the drop quote from Irish Kelly, just to read it out, who was the lead author of the report, she said, unless the underlying drivers that are giving rise to the current intercounty commitment levels are identified and addressed, the knock-on effects identified in this study are likely to be amplified among future generations of players. It's the old adage, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat the mistakes. And essentially, that's the 31 hours that has become kind of again, it's interesting. You guys get blamed for the 31 hours, and yet it's your members who are the ones who are suffering the impact of it. So presumably you guys want fewer than 31 hours to be the level of commitment that is required from intercounty players into the future.
Absolutely, Ger. It's a number that people refer to, and I don't mind who they blame for it. What we need to do is collectively to reduce it. And one of the motions that we're bringing to the floor of the AGM this evening is the idea of you actually might recall from actually, sorry, it's a separate motion is in relation to Don Davis, but we'll come back to that. But a second motion we're bringing is around optimal contact hours. And the idea of contact hours is widely recognised in different sports, based off sports science. How many hours per week would a professional athlete train? Obviously, we're not a professional sport, but we can learn from professional sports, like what we do on the pitch, from an S&C perspective and conditioning. We should be embedding that in how intercounty setups are training. And I was a firm believer that when under Jim Gavin's regime, we trained less than every other county, and I still believe that, and it was because it was heavily based in sports science and smart training. And I think if we can do the same with the optimal contact hours, we can reduce the 31-hour requirements based on intercounty players. And hopefully, one of the outcomes of COVID, maybe a positive outcome, is a trend towards working from home, and the impact, or working locally, or working remote, and the impact potentially that can have on players not having to travel the distances that they had to travel, because a lot of that 31 hours in many instances was made up of traveling.
What is the optimal contact hour in your view? I know it's probably a bit of a hunch and that there's going to be research done to actually nail it down, but from your experience, what is that number?
Owen, I'm not going to pretend to know the answer to that question. There's sports scientists out there who'll be able to identify that. But I do believe that like four nights a week is the ideal. One strength conditioning, two pitch, and one weekend, and there's a scope for the strength conditioning to be more localized, and because it is all personal. Your strength conditioning program now is personal to you, and more trends rather than a collective program. So there is opportunities for that session to be done in your own setting. So. But I just think we need to be creative about it, Owen. I think we need to be forward thinking, and one of the key things that we continue to try and embed as a part of our culture in the GPA and intercounty games is balance between a player's personal, professional, and their physical life. And to be able to find that balance, we need to create space. And at the moment, Jer, I don't know whether you remember Don Davis's reference to the 31 hours, and he did it in a quite jovial manner. But it doesn't leave a hell of a lot more space when you include sleep and work in there to do anything else. And I think it's important that we understand that, but find solutions to reduce it.
Just on that, Paul, would it be a situation that there is a guideline on whatever the hours would be? So say, I don't know what it could be, 21, 25 hours. Would there then be a mandate from the GPA to say to every county board, this is how much you're allowed to train your team? And if that is the case, how do you implement that? How do you actually ensure that those rules are actually being adhered to? Because I think that was one of the big talking points of recent weeks when Tom Ryan said that players and county boards should be called out for training. And I think that's something that really stuck in the craw of a lot of people, whereas perhaps from the GPA statement, as much criticism as it got, there was a sense of reality in the idea that players need to be insured because there is a culture in the GA of rules being skirted. So in kind of a roundabout way, then, if you were to come up with a new contact hours rule, how do you implement it?
A good point, and I think the idea of culture is important. That there needs to be a change in culture overall in the overall association to understand if we are to achieve sustainable amateurism, which is the core of what we believe should be the foundation of the GAA. It needs to be able to strike a balance between all the different elements of it. And one of the things around adherence to rules and adherence to policies is paramount for it to be able to deliver on some of this best practice ideas that other sports do utilize. And I feel that education is important in relation to this also, that if all intercounty setups understood what it is required to perform at the optimal, based off sports science, obviously, that they wouldn't have to overtrain. So I guess that it's just going to take all stakeholders to come together. No different to what we had to achieve over the last number of weeks. County boards, ourselves, the GAA need to work together to be able to strike this balance.
What they do in the NFL, and Don Davis was from the NFL Players Association, is that the union representative will report if the team does a contact session that they're not supposed to do. And also there are people who travel around whose job it is to make sure that the sessions aren't in pads when they're not supposed to be in pads and all that kind of stuff. So how do you police something like this if it does come in? Because you can see this happening really quickly, where there's a general acceptance that this is a big step forward. It'll cost the GA less money, which would presumably get them on board pretty quickly too. So how do you police it?
It's a good, Jerry, I'm not entirely certain if you've seen the three motions for this evening, but one of the motions that we have, and that's what I was alluding to earlier on, being brought to the floor this evening is around a confidential disclosure platform. And it's ultimately off the back of the ESRI report and the student report, whereby players are crying out for an off season. So this is for a reporting mechanism to allow players to report non-compliance to the off season. So that was, as I alluded to earlier, when I mentioned Don Davis, it was Don who educated me in that platform that the NFL Players Association have. Theirs is around physical contact, because of the prevalence of injuries, but equally ours is due to the player welfare, prevalence of injury, but also in relation to downtime and balance. A platform like this could be utilised in that manner. So if we can set that up, use it for an off season. If the platform is working and there's engagement with it, that could be then rolled out and used for the contact hours also.
Okay. It all makes, as you say, common sense, and hopefully post-COVID we're all going to get an injection of that. Can I ask you about off seasons? What do you mean by an off season? Do you mean an off season when there's no intercounty, or do you mean there's no club and intercounty, so players get a genuine break? What's your definition of that?
Selfishly looking at it from an inter-county player's perspective, I believe that the month of December should be completely off season. There should be no activity, and that could change based off what happens in fixture reform. But as is, it should be an off season where guys are just allowed to have complete downtime. The only thing at the moment where that would be impeded is when you're talking about colleges and you're talking about provincials that have been now moved to December. But you would achieve a high proportion of an off season by shutting down intercounty in December. However, by looking at the fixture reform, we have one of the key principles we brought in was around an off season, and it should be paramount to the whole GAA. I think it's not a bad thing for the whole association to shut down for a month. And
that's where some common ground could be found between you guys and the CPA, for example, or you guys and club players, where it's all GAA activity stops and everybody hits a reset button.
Absolutely, and we did come out with a press release in conjunction with the CPA after they decided to step away from the fixtures task force, because we did understand that there's a lot of areas of common ground, and as I highlighted, like all inter-county players are club players as well. But we need to understand that in any season whereby you split it, or you do a hybrid, or you do concurrent, or whatever model it is, inter-county players are asked to play at each one of those. So we just need to make sure that we are protecting the interests of our players.
Paul, could I just ask then on the subject kind of again of affecting change and making sure it actually happens? Like, there's really good ideas in terms of your research, bringing the relative fixture proposals on road shows, researching what the optimal contact hours are for training. To actually affect that change, to actually get that over the line, that can often be a complicated process. You sometimes see great motions, for example, go before Congress and they get defeated. Some people will say that the GPA are too close to the GEA to be able to have the necessary arguments to get these over the line. Is that something that you might have concerns about in the future, that you need to sort of keep a distance from the GEA? But how do you end up doing that if you are quite close to the GEA and essentially funded in part by the GEA?
No, it's a really good question, and I believe in a partnership model, and where there's a respect across the board. We respect them, they respect us, and in any relationship like that, that doesn't mean that we have to agree on every point, and that doesn't mean that we can't push the boundaries. And I believe that we can still do that in a partnership model. No different to some of the policies that we've been trying to bring forward so far, even from last year's AGM. They do take time, and this year in particular, because of COVID, they have been delayed. But one of the other interesting policies we discussed last year was around competitive balance. There hasn't been a hell of a lot spoken about this year in the media spheres, but it's really important from our perspective, is the whole idea of uncertainty of outcome. And that's from learnings that we had from the AFL Players Association. They rolled this out in 2016 because there was, I suppose, a number of teams that were underperforming, and they were trying to bring balance to it. And I believe this would be a fantastic initiative to be rolled out by the GAA from right across the board, in particular in the inter-county setup. And it could bring greater competitions, and some of it can be done through fixture reform, competition reform, and other can be done through funding and through other mechanisms. So, but they do take time on. There are things in the GA that take time, just purely based off the setup and the Congress and what it takes to change a rule.
And can I just ask then, are you content with that partnership at the moment? And I know that can be kind of an awkward question to ask because you have to work with the GEA quite often, but is that constantly under review? The fact that that partnership doesn't necessarily always have to be a partnership. Sometimes change can be affected if you're outside the tent. Is that always up for consideration with GPA, because it is a constant criticism?
Absolutely, and I do feel the criticism comes because of a lack of understanding. And like even in my tenure in this role, I've had many arguments, public and behind the scenes, with the GAA. But equally, the next day I may have to enter into a room and work on a program of work that we've been trying to get over the line. So that's an understanding between ourselves and the GAA that we're not always going to agree, and we will continue to represent the inter-county players and their interests under the 3 pillars of welfare, development and representation. And back to your point, Jerry, earlier on in relation to perception, people won't always agree with what we're trying to achieve because we represent the inter-county players, and that's just a part of it. But equally, they won't always understand the idea of our relationship with the GAA as well.
Could you just give us a couple of quick sentences on competitive balance and what it is and how it might actually impact games, for example?
Well, ultimately, the idea in the AFL was their North Star, let's call it, was to increase the uncertainty of outcome of games. And that's what they were aiming to achieve. Because there were some teams that were far superior than others. And I think there were only 18 teams within their league, and they wanted to bring balance to it. Other sports do it through different formats like salary caps and financial fair play and so forth. So it's the idea of competitive balance and equalisation strategies within sport are common. We've yet to grasp it within the GAA, but it's something that I feel that we could we would have to radically change it from professional sports, but we take it, the model, the idea, and we learn from it. Things like spending caps for squads, so there's fairness across the board. Team sizes, squads sizes, the format of championships. So there's a number of different ways you could look at it, but a bit like contact hours on, we don't have all the answers to this, but what we do have is we've a will to find them. And we actually had set up a group to start looking at this on the 19th of March. Unfortunately, we have had to delay it, but it's right on our agenda, and we believe we'll have it completed by the end of the year. But we're going to embed it in the negotiation strategies also.
Okay, so it'll be a conversation to be had at central level with GAA about how, so that players training in counties can feel like they're going to have a crack at something, a meaningful outcome in a competition that they believe they have a chance of winning.
Exactly, Joe.
I think we could all get behind that. Maybe splitting Dublin should be top of the agenda for that one. I mean, that's always something. That's an agenda we like to push on this show, Paul.
Oh, right, sorry, I didn't tune in for that episode.
Paul Flynn, thanks very much for joining us. Best of luck.
Thanks, guys.